Well, this has been a pretty incredible, for me, an amazing gathering. Just so heartfelt, and it's probably one of the best gatherings I've ever been to. And it's coming to a close, and I couldn't think of a better way for this gathering to end with Tim here, who some of you may know and a lot of you may not know. And Tim's going to be talking to us about something that is very, very dear to all of us. And it's the topic's sort of around, and tell me if I've got this wrong, Tim, please, but how can we better relationships between philanthropic organisations and Aboriginal organisations? And before I invite Tim to speak to us, let me tell you just a little bit about Tim. So I've got some words here. It's a very impressive background. So Tim is a member of the Yuin people of the south-east coast of New South Wales. And Tim's currently a barrister in Melbourne. He has a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Law with honours from the Australian National University and a Master of Laws from Harvard Law School. Tim's a board member of the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth and a trustee of the Reichstein Foundation and the Roberta Sykes Indigenous Education Foundation. Tim serves on the editorial board of the Australian Indigenous Law Review. Tim is also the current co-convener of the Philanthropy Australian Indigenous Funders Group and a member of the Gandil Philanthropy Indigenous Grants Advisory Committee. That's a mouthful indeed. So please join me in welcoming Tim. Thank you.
Well, I'm the only one between all of you and cake, so I will take that responsibility full head on, particularly because I know what it's like to get between aunties and cake. So, as a young man, I don't think I have that right, so I'll keep it short and sharp and to the point. Firstly, can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the country upon which we meet, the Woor-Dungin people of the Kulin Nation, pay my respects to them as a Yuin man from southeast coast New South Wales. My grandfather grew up in the mission of Wallaga Lake. My grandmother was a Wiradjuri woman from central New South Wales. She grew up just on the mission at Narandra, and they raised their kids just off the mission at La Perouse, which is where my mum grew up. And met my dad, who was a tall, lanky white guy from Adelaide. And this curvy Aboriginal woman chased him in Sydney, and a few years later, suddenly there I was. So I'd like to pay my respects to that history and to all of the histories that everyone brings to this room, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room and the non-Aboriginal people. We all bring our histories into their space, the spirits that we represent, the legacies that we represent, and I just want to acknowledge that. My first contact with Woor-Dungin was just after I'd become a trustee of the Reichstein Foundation, and Chris was our executive officer, and Chris said, "Oh, you've got to come up to Healesville with me. There's going to be this great meeting on, and it's about this new project that we're thinking of calling it Woor-Dungin because it's, we don't want it to sound bureaucratic. We want it to have an Indigenous name and a name with meaning. And so you should come and meet some of the people and have a chat to them." And I was just blown away by the passion in the room, and Auntie Dacina and Auntie Frances, and just the amazing amount of energy, and I want to pay my respects to that, pay my respects to Woor-Dungin, and also something that is obvious but should be explicitly stated is not only that it's a community-controlled organisation in of itself, considering its founders, but that it's led by women and women in our community. And I think that's such proof that women are the backbones of our communities. They run our families, they run our communities, they run our national affairs, and no matter how many black male faces we might see in front of things, we know who's doing the work. And I got raised by strong Aboriginal women, and I know who did the work on me, so I pay my respects to that. In terms of the theme of what I wanted to talk about, a story really where I started to really become engaged in Indigenous community work was through youth activities when I was young, and a whole bunch of friends of mine who I looked up to, mentors in their late 20s when I was a teenager, started the National Indigenous Youth Movement of Australia. It's no longer around, but for about 5 or 6 years it did amazing work. And typical Indigenous organisation that fell over because of funds, and it fell over because it couldn't get funds. And its main injection of funds to keep it going for a majority of the period came from overseas. When my friends were applying for grants to start up the organisation, they applied all around philanthropy and government here in Australia. And late one night at about 4 a.m, when it was about 5 p.m. over in the States, they put in a joke application to the Levi Strauss Foundation in San Francisco, which gives a lot of money to Indigenous communities in the States, thinking that they did not have a shot in hell at getting funding to be able to set up the organisation. And to their surprise, they got a Skype interview. Well, at that time it was probably just by phone, but and they ended up getting $50,000 to set up the organisation on the basis of an interview with faceless people over the phone. And they couldn't even get a letter back from the majority of Australian philanthropies. And it just shows you the kind of stark contrast and how far we have to go to really get philanthropy thinking about funding directly in startup, particularly startup Indigenous community organisations. And over time, that has been progressing through the amazing work that people like Chris have been doing through Philanthropy Australia's Indigenous Funding Group, and some of the typical faces that you see, Trudy, people like that, really putting in effort around this work, that we're getting there, but there's some things that we have to do better. And it really made me think of 4 kind of key principles that I think really need to govern how philanthropy works better with Aboriginal organisations. The first thing is about building relationships of trust and confidence. I can't speak more strongly about how important it is to build a relationship with Indigenous community, particularly Indigenous communities that you're thinking about funding and do fund. That for us as Indigenous people, for us as mob, it's those relationships of trust and confidence that mean the most to us, that are about, that it is, that it really takes vulnerability for an Aboriginal organisation to apply for funds. It really puts their heart and spirit on the line about sharing their vision for their kids, their vision for their future, their vision for their community, and that's something that's extremely sacred, and we forget that that's actually sacred knowledge that Indigenous people are sharing, and that should be treated as such by philanthropy. And so building that relationship with those community organisations is so essential to be able to understand how that relationship can best work to get the best out of the relationship, to get the best out of the community organisation, and also get the best out of the philanthropy, a philanthropic organisation who has a genuine interest in doing the right thing. Philanthropy has a genuine interest in using its funds to achieve good social impacts. There is a facade of coldness to philanthropy that, when you tap that back, really shares the aims often of Aboriginal community organisations that wants good outcomes, that wants to better the lives of Aboriginal kids, that wants to assist Aboriginal communities. And so building those relationships of trust and confidence is a reciprocal relationship that will get the best for both, and I think is really, really important. And there's so many practical things that can be done about that. When you get an application from an Aboriginal organisation, like Reichstein has done for years, pick up the phone and call, clarify things in the application. If you have questions of clarification, get to know the people on the application, and you'll often find that the information you get is so important to understanding what the type of application you're getting is. And if possible, go and meet face to face those people who are applying, because there is such power in meeting Aboriginal community members, because there's so much more passion that they can present face to face, like we've all said here today, than on a piece of paper. And I think that's so important. And I had a philanthropist say, well, I don't know if I really have the time. I'm so busy doing this work. Now that's totally understandable. Don't fund us. If you don't have the time to build the relationships, don't fund us, because the money will be wasted. And that's not good for you, and that's not good for us, because that sets us up to fail. And if we fail, you won't come back again, and everybody else will feel like we don't deserve the money. So, if you don't have the time to build those relationships, exit the Indigenous philanthropic space. That sounds harsh, but I think it's really true. Second is to really be mission and purpose oriented. Think very clearly about what the mission and purpose of the Aboriginal organisation that is applying is, and really delve into that. I think sometimes we, as and putting my philanthropy hat on, we sometimes jump to the detail too quickly. It's important to step back and think, what is this organisation trying to achieve in its community? What does that look like? Because sometimes you'll often find that they've attempted to write the application in a way to fit your needs more than theirs. So think back about what is it that is trying to be achieved in that community, and act accordingly. And ask what a project is really about, rather than what the project is attempted to be sold as to you as philanthropy. And I think that's really important. The third thing is to not be afraid to assist in building infrastructure and governance. We know good governance is essential for an Indigenous community organisation to be successful. But we also know that a lot of good ideas are out there that just need some assistance on governance to be able to go to the next level. So don't be afraid in directly funding governance, directly funding building of that skill base. Because if there's a good idea there, that's the key to be able to exploit and really work with. And the fourth thing, and this is something that I'm really passionate about for philanthropy, is don't be burnt by risk. Don't be burnt. This is hard work. 200 years of dispossession, of moving Aboriginal people off country, of constant disappointment in government policy. This is hard work, and it should be. Don't pull out just because a few things go wrong. Just because those relationships of trust and confidence take time. Don't be afraid of that, because we live it. We don't get to leave that at 5 p.m. at night. This is not 9 to 5 for us. And so I think philanthropy needs to understand that. because there's so many philanthropic organisations that used to fund Indigenous projects that had one bad experience and now don't fund anymore. And I think that's a real disappointment, because the same probably wouldn't be said about the majority of other areas of interest. If someone did something bad in education and some money went down the drain, well, they wouldn't cut education from their funding. If something went bad in health, we're not stopping funding health just because one health project didn't go right, but for some reason we're held to a higher standard often. And I think that's unfair. And if anything, there's more reason to understand the risks involved with our projects than there are with others. So hold in there. Lastly, I just want to end with this really great, and a few people have heard me say this story, this really great saying that I heard from the Roger Federer Foundation. The CEO was over when Roger Federer was playing for the Australian Open, and some philanthropists got the privilege of hearing her speak. Roger wasn't there, shame job, I wish he was. But anyway, the CEO was this amazing woman that he poached from Credit Suisse in Switzerland, who runs their projects in Southern Africa regarding preschools in communities. And she said the happiest day in a community should be when the foundation leaves, not when it comes. Because then you know you've done the right job, because the community is ready to do it by itself. And she said, when we go into a community, it's there's that parable about give a man a fish he can eat for a day, teach a man to fish he can feed himself for the rest of his life. She goes, well, we go into a community and we ask them, what do you like to eat? You know, that's the first question, you know. They might not like fish, so you teach them how to fish, that's not going to help them very much. So, you know, we need to go back to basics, go into a community and ask them what they want to eat. And I think that's really the foundation of what I've tried to say here today, is that, you know, that we focus on community organisations' answers to us as philanthropy, when we should focus more on the right questions we should be asking to learn the most about what we can achieve together. So thank you for having me.
Tim, a couple of words come to mind. Thank you so much for what came to mind was passion of wisdom and a willingness to share so much of your vast experience with everyone in the room. And just as a little token of our gratitude, Peter has something for you. So please join me in